Hi, welcome back to this week's episode of JAMA Network Open Live. I'm Seth Truger, Digital Media Editor for JAMA Network Open, and we've got a special guest today.
Fred Rivara, I'm the Editor-in-Chief at JAMA Network Open. I was here in Chicago for another meeting and decided to step in for Michael.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us, Fred.
Good to be here.
Great to have you. Of course, if you're following us along live, feel free to ask us questions on Facebook or Twitter. You can just add us at Twitter. At JAMA Network Open. We're also, for the first time, broadcasting live on YouTube, so you can follow along there as well if you're not already.
Great.
Great. So we're going to start with our first article today, is the association of electronic cigarette use with subsequent initiation of tobacco cigarettes in U.S. youth.
This is such an important topic.
Yeah.
I mean, Juul has just, their stock has gone through the roof because they've been so successful. And I'm a pediatrician and, get questions all the time about, is it better for my kid to use e-cigarette than a smoke?
Yeah. Well, it certainly seems better to use e-cigarettes than to smoke, but the question is, do kids who use e-cigarettes then go on to smoke at a higher rate than kids who don't? And that's what this study is trying to answer.
Right.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because what they found is they looked at a bunch of kids in this PATH study, followed them over a bunch of years, basically 13 to 15-year-olds, so it would be the ones who would stay in the study. Of all the kids who didn't smoke in the first wave, when they followed up in a couple years, tried to see if they started with either if they started vaping using e-cigarettes, if they started using other tobacco products, and then if they ended up still smoking toward the end of the study.
And what it showed is that those who started with e-cigarettes, vaping, were much more likely to end up smoking cigarettes than kids who never did that.
Right. And unfortunately, it's the rates were about 20% of the kids who started vaping were still smoking later on or had ever tried cigarettes. So it does seem like this is more and more compelling evidence that e-cigarettes do lead to smoking more than not smoking.
So it's kind of a gateway product for kids that ended up smoking, and it's not something that they necessarily stick to. And I think the other concerning thing is that not only do they vape, but when they do turn to regular cigarettes, they do both.
Yep, there is some good news in here too. 86% of the kids in the study did not use tobacco at all, and the rates of smoking were actually not that high. The rates of ever having smoking after trying something were about 6%, and the rates of currently smoking, so about, I think I was smoking within the last 30 days, were only about 2%. So the rates are still pretty low, but the rates were certainly higher for kids who vaped to then move on to cigarettes.
And I think the important thing is why the kids are so important is that 80%, 85% of adults who smoke began smoking before they were 18 years of age. Mm-hmm. So you get, and nicotine is incredibly addictive. So people get addicted in their teenage years, and then they have to confront this problem for the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. And they try to stop smoking, and it's sort of an on and off thing where they try and then relapse, try and relapse. And finally, many people will stop smoking. Whether e-cigarettes will help them to stop smoking is a whole different question.
Right. There was another notable paper in another notable journal that we don't need to talk about today that showed that e-cigarettes might be helpful in helping people who do smoke quit smoking, but that's a different question than what we find here. And unfortunately, it seems like a double-edged sword.
Yeah. This PATH data is something that's done annually or every other year, and it provides very good data on the proportion of kids that are smoking. So, I think the takeaway message is for parents, for physicians counseling kids, is they should stay away from e-cigarettes as much as they should stay away from regular cigarettes.
Yep, because the whole goal is to keep kids healthy so they can be healthy adults, live long, healthy lives, and take care of me when I'm older.
Me too.
Right. All right, so we're going to move on to the next paper, another opioid paper. So this is Prevention of Prescription Opioid Misuse and Projected Overdose Deaths in the United States by Kishi Chen and colleagues.
This is, a very important study. We all are aware of the opioid epidemic. I've studied injuries, including firearm injuries, for a long time in the United States. But now, if you look at the data from the CDC, 70,000 people a year die from prescription overdoses, mostly opioids. 70,000 people a year. So that's huge. That's almost as many as firearms and motor vehicles together. And we all as physicians are struggling with, A, what our role is in that, and B, what can we do to prevent it?
Okay. So this team did a great job of doing some really complex modeling and basically what's going to happen going forward. And if you look at figure 4, which you can show, it's basically what are the projections, kind of the worst case scenario and best case scenario of how opioid deaths are going to be moving forward based on trends from the last 15 or so years. We then tried to tease out what we can do by prescribing fewer opioids as physicians. The good news is we can make a little bit of a dent. The bad news is it seems like that deprescribing is only going to be a little bit of a dent in the opioid epidemic, and we can't just deprescribe ourselves out of this mess.
And when we say a little, it's like they calculate if we stop prescribing opioids, we reduce the opioid deaths by 3 to 5%. So it's really a very small proportion. And the reason is that most of the opioid deaths now are really due to illegal drugs like fentanyl.
Right.
And that's, it's a huge problem. They're getting these illegally, they're manufactured illegally, and physicians really don't control that part of things. They can control about whether or not people end up getting addicted, but we have a huge number of people there already addicted, and we don't really know what to do about those people. Let's be frank. We really don't know how to prevent that number of deaths occurring each year in the United States. The feds are spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year now trying to figure that out, but we don't really know yet.
Right. I mean, I've seen some optimistic things, that have been changing. We're moving more towards buprenorphine access, prescribing for buprenorphine, medically assisted therapy, et cetera. The needle certainly seems to be moving, but 70,000 deaths a year is a lot, and unfortunately, it seems like physicians, did have some part of the responsibility in prescribing people into opioid addiction, but it's a one-way valve or a ratchet, and we're not going to be able to just stop prescribing our way out of it.
So when you see these patients in the emergency department, how easy or hard is it for you to get them into an opioid addiction program? It's
hard, unfortunately. I have a couple colleagues who do have the buprenorphine waivers, which is great, but we don't have programs to set people up with for the most part. It's really just on the ground. We just don't have the resources for it. Those programs just aren't set up. We don't have the ability to do the soft handoffs, that sort of thing.
Right. We're now in our pediatric clinic in Seattle. We actually now have a couple of buprenorphine prescribers because again, it's really hard, and so we feel like the primary care doctors really have to pick up the slack here, including pediatricians.
Yep, and I would love to work in a system where we had better follow-up for patients to get them into it, but some of it's kind of like prescribing blood pressure medication to somebody I see for the first time hypertension is giving them a week of hydrochlorothiazide making a difference if they don't have anybody to follow up with to get new prescriptions.
Right, and we know that while brief interventions that you might give in the emergency department work really pretty well for alcohol, they don't really work for opioids.
Nope, and honestly, a lot of the patients I see, some of them are what we call pre-contemplative. They're not lying when they say it's really addictive.
Right,
it's hard.
And right now they don't want to quit.
Yep, it's too bad. So I'm still an optimist, and there's lots of room for improvement. But unfortunately, not prescribing pain medications is only going to be a very, very small part of the puzzle.
And in JAMA Network Open, we really continue to publish a lot of papers on opioids. We've published a bunch already. We'll continue to do so, trying to figure out how can the health community make a difference in this problem.
And if you can do a paper that marries machine learning with fixing opioids, then
we'll be good.
All right, so the last paper we're going to talk about today is the association of wearable activity monitors with assessment of daily ambulation and length of stay among patients undergoing major surgery by Timothy Daskovich and colleagues.
Well, I work at a hospital that does a lot of trauma care, and even among the kids and the adolescents that we see, we say, how much did you get out of bed? How much did you walk around the hall? How much did you exercise? They're all complaining about their constipation and this and that. They want to get home, and I say, well, one of the first steps to getting home is getting out of bed and walking around. But, I'm relying on them to tell me how many loops they did around the hallway.
Right, exactly. And one of the interesting findings for this paper, about 100 post-op patients of different surgeries, mostly the kind of things that older patients get, like prostate cancer and hips, they found that the surgeons were actually really bad at estimating what the patients were actually doing, especially since 95 of the patients were ordered to be ambulate with assistance and nothing else.
Right. And the surgeons come in and make rounds anyhow at 5 o'clock in the morning when everybody's asleep. So they can barely talk to the patients.
Right. Not to hit on surgeons too much. Surgeons do a great job and do lots of things at 5 o'clock in the morning, so I don't have to, which is wonderful. But they did find some interesting things in this paper. Unfortunately, it's unsure what to do as far as targets for how to fix things, but they did find that basically Fitbit-based monitoring of ambulation did help predict who had shorter lengths of stay.
And it makes a lot of sense that, one of the first things, rule of quality improvement is you first have to measure it if you want to improve it. So being able to actually measure how much patients are walking is really the first step in us improving how much we're able to get patients up and out of bed and walking.
Right.
And I think, not only will it improve length of stay, but it will save money and make patients feel better and get get home earlier.
Right. Yeah. Again, I'm an optimist, and I think what this is saying is that if we can get better, accurate ways of assessing who's ready to go home, then we can send people home who are appropriate to go home sooner. Potentially in the future, this might be some kind of seed data that will help find ways to improve people who are ambulating to get them ready to go home sooner. But right now, it seems like there's some low-hanging fruit at identifying the early ambulators.
Yeah, and I think this is we talk a lot about wearable technology, and for the most part, it hasn't really proven its promise. But this is one where it really might be helpful.
Yep, absolutely.
So.
Yep. So those are the papers that we're going to talk about today. There are, of course, you can read these papers and more at JAMA-networkopen.com for free. As always, they're open access, and there's a bunch of other papers there as well. All our papers are also now on PubMed, so you can read them there. You can get them linked from there as well. Of course, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube at JAMA Network Open.
We publish every Friday, every Friday morning. We publish a lot of great work, and I urge you to go to our website and take a look.
Right. We're going to be back again next week on Tuesday again, probably at 2 o'clock Central, and Mike should be joining us again because unfortunately Fred has to, ironically, go back from our warm weather to Seattle's snowstorm today.
That's right. If I can ever get back there tonight.
Right. I mean, I don't know. It's going to be tough, although at least O'Hare's not the problem. Usually O'Hare's the problem.
I know.
So. All right. Well, great. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for listening.